Good morning. Welcome to the podcast. This is actually my second attempt at recording this episode. I actually recorded episode 2 just over a week ago, and the audio, like, it was a full hour, and the audio just straight up didn't work at all. And it was really discouraging, not gonna lie. And it wasn't really till now where I was like, okay, I gotta do this again. And I'm not sure what happened. I really hope it wasn't my screencasting software, because I use this for work. I need this to be dependable. And I was looking at maybe doing this like audio only, but some of these audio recording programs are really expensive. I'm sure there's some free options out there, but again, this podcast is basically something fun for me to do, and if it does grow to the point where it's in my best interest to invest a bit of money into some proper software and whatnot, I'll definitely do it. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the feedback on episode 1. Oh yeah, I'm definitely like rebranding already, by the way. And there's a reason for that. When I tried to record that last episode, I got to like the 45-minute mark, and I was like, oh man, I'm already out of stuff to talk about. And I mentioned in the first episode, I don't want to be limited at all. Okay, I don't want to have a podcast where I feel like I'm restricted in the topics I can talk about in relation to hockey, obviously. But that also goes for my own kind of like restrictions on how long I have to talk about stuff, right? Because sometimes I'll want to do a 45-minute episode. Sometimes I might want to go a full hour. And today I kind of expect this one to go about half an hour. I do want to record another one back to back here, because I actually have the host to myself today, which is really nice in regards to the podcast. So, I'm planning on doing another one later today, and then maybe even one tomorrow. We'll see. I do have a lot to talk about, obviously. But yeah, I am thinking about rebranding, though. I'm thinking, the Hockey Variety Podcast. I think that's a pretty good name to go with, I would say, because already the Hockey Variety Hour podcast, it's a bit long. So, gonna try to condense it a bit. And, episode 2 already get going with the rebrand here, but I guess it's better to do a rebrand on episode 2 rather than episode 200 or whatever. So, yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really excited for today's episode. Gonna get into a pretty controversial topic. I want to revisit the Don Cherry firing. Yeah, because it's actually been 3 years now. It was November 2019. And, it's actually New Year's Eve. I'm recording this right now, New Year's Eve 2022. So tomorrow will be 2023, which is totally crazy. Time is flying by, no doubt. And, I feel like, 3 years have passed. I think it's a good time to revisit that topic. I do have a pretty neutral stance on it, so I think I'm a pretty good person to talk about. But I think there's a lot to unpack, especially now that we've had some time away from Don Cherry being part of Hockey Night in Canada, and really how that's impacted Hockey Night in Canada as a whole, which I'm looking forward to talking about. I'm also going to be talking a bit about how to run a beer league team. I almost said a beer team, though sometimes some of the teams you play against, it's like, oh, you guys are a beer team, whatever that's supposed to mean. But yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about running my beer league team as well, because I think I'm doing a pretty good job at it. And I wouldn't mind sharing a bit of my insight on how exactly I go about that. When I recorded that first attempt at episode 2, I was actually playing like a day-long tournament here in the town I live in. Like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 25-minute games. And we got 3 games in. We got 3rd out of 8, though that depends on who you ask, because, we won the losers bracket. We lost our first game because the team we played was oh man, that was the fastest, in terms of pace, that was the fastest game of hockey I ever played. I felt like I was easily one of the worst guys out there. Just so fast. I felt like everyone was so young. I'm like, man, I know I'm only 30. I'm turning 31 pretty soon, actually, in a few weeks here. But I felt like I was 70. I was like, oh my goodness. I couldn't keep up at all. Apparently, there was a guy on the other team who got like a NCAA scholarship to play somewhere. I don't know if that's like Div 1 or Div 2, but either way, a lot better than most of the guys out there for sure. So that was crazy. And even after that first game where we had a bit of a tough time, they only won by a goal, but they hit like 6 posts in that 25-minute game. So I kind of feel like maybe we should have lost by a lot more, but we did keep it close, which is cool. And then the next 2 games, they were fun. We won them both. I got a really fluky goal. Oh man, but they don't ask how, they ask how many. So there you go. Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and yeah, just looking forward to this short podcast, and we'll have another one later today. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's get right into it. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about the firing of Don Cherry, which happened just over 3 years ago. Definitely, I would say the most controversial thing easily that I've talked about on this podcast so far, but might be for a while. And I think it's a pretty interesting thing to dissect, and I'm hoping after you listen to this, maybe you'll have a bit of a different opinion on it, because you definitely have people that feel very strongly for his firing and people strongly against him being fired. And if you're really feeling strongly one way or the other, I'm hoping that after this podcast, you can kind of at least get an understanding for both sides. So I'll try my best just to kind of quickly recap what happened. So in November of 2019, and for a while there, Don Cherry, he was having a bit of a poor streak when it came to takes on Hockey Night in Canada. But you know what? Like, I think guys having differing opinions on hockey topics, I think that's really important. Because otherwise you're going to get a bunch of people saying the same thing, and it's going to turn to a really boring game, I think. You look at guys like John Tortorella, and I'm a big fan of the John Scott podcast, and he has a lot of pretty silly takes as well. There's a commentator on Jack Edwards from Boston. And don't get me wrong, he's the biggest homer there is in terms of the Boston Bruins, but he keeps the game interesting, and I think that's important. But at the same time, there's a line that you really can't cross, which I think it's pretty safe to say Don Cherry crossed a line. I don't really think it matters who you ask. You can understand that there's a line there. There's things you can't say on air, and he said something you shouldn't say on air. I think that's pretty much universally agreed upon, but I am going to get a little bit into I don't know, some of the semantics, I guess. But okay, where was I going with that? So yeah, prior to Don Cherry saying this thing on air that he said, which I'll get to in a second, yeah, he had a few takes that weren't going over so well with hockey fans. Certain opinions about how certain players play and how the game's officiated, maybe things like that. I can't remember specific examples, but I remember people weren't too happy. Which again, I think it's a good thing. I think you need to have differing opinions out there, or it's going to be a really boring game. So, anyways, one night on Hockey Night in Canada, Don Cherry, in referring to people not wearing poppies, or a lot of people not wearing poppies on Remembrance Day in recent years, in particular 2019, Don Cherry felt really strongly about that, and I think he just kind of hit a breaking point. And I'm not going to quote it word for word, but pretty much what he said is, he said the dreaded "you people," which is, I've been hearing this get kind of, joked about on TV as far back as I can remember. You don't say "you people" when referring to any group of people, whether that be race, gender. You don't say "you people" and really make it sound like that you're singling out a single group of people, which is essentially what he did. He said, "You people, you enjoy our life in Canada, but you won't wear a poppy." And clearly he hit a breaking point and he had to let that out. Now, how many people interpreted that? And I feel like it's a really fair way to see how he said it. Was that he was specifically referring to newcomers to Canada. And when I rewatched it, I watched it right before hopping on the podcast here. It really does sound like that. And when you given his history of talking about European players, and you know, I think that's really what it sounded like. And maybe that's what he meant. Maybe that's not what he meant. In the little bit of research I did before this, it really sounded like he was really referring to newcomers to Canada, which is not good. I mean, there's clearly newcomers to Canada who respect the military, and there might be some that aren't, that or that don't. But I think it's the same thing for people who were born and raised here. There's people that do support the military. There's people that probably don't show enough appreciation for the military. Um, and yeah, so he said that on air, and obviously that wasn't a good look at all. And within days, he was fired from Sportsnet. And then a whole other can of worms opened from that. Don Cherry went on air, I think it was the following Saturday, basically apologizing on behalf of Sportsnet. And Ron MacLean, he also uh, apologized for himself for just kind of being a bit of a bystander in that situation. And he got some flack for that. He got a lot of criticism, people saying that he threw Don under the bus. I don't think that's what it is. Ron MacLean was essentially representing Sportsnet in that situation. And, there isn't really a better person to go on air and make that apology. I think he was probably the best person to do that. He's very well respected. So I think from Sportsnet's standpoint, that was the right call. I feel kind of bad for Ron, though. I think he got a lot of flack for that from some people who felt really strongly against Don Cherry being fired. And I really don't think he was throwing him under the bus. I think he said what he had to say in that situation. And yeah, I mean, that's it. And, Ron was being a bit of a bystander as well. If you rewatch the actual raw footage of Don Cherry saying what he said, Ron's sitting there bobbing his head, and I don't think that's a good look either. So I think he's in the right for apologizing for himself, obviously. I don't really think he threw Don under the bus, but I can see how people would see it that way. Anyways, after the firing, Don Cherry did some interviews. He went on to make his own podcast. I listened to a few episodes of it years ago. I thought it was pretty good. If you're a big fan of Don Cherry, I'd recommend it, really. Though if you're not really a huge fan of his takes, and then maybe not for you. But at the end of the day, he is a very insightful guy in the hockey community. So it might be worth a listen if you are a fan of his. So I'm going to start with the Sportsnet side of things, and then I'll move on to Don Cherry's side of things, or at least how I interpret it. So it's Sportsnet. Okay, it's clear you can't say that on air. Okay, I think that's pretty universally agreed upon. You can't say "you people" on air like that. And I understand that cancel culture is a big thing, and it was really, really big around that time as well. It felt like people were getting quote unquote canceled left, right, and center. So I think when people saw the firing of Don Cherry, that's exactly how they interpreted it. Oh, he made a mistake, blow it out of proportion kind of thing. And I'm not saying that is or isn't what it is, but that's how it was interpreted at the time, and it still is, But at the same time, he made a big mistake. You can't say that on air. Now, my big question, and I don't know, but I think this is the biggest factor. Okay, this is my thesis of my essay here. This is the biggest thing. Did Don Cherry have the opportunity to apologize on air? Did Sportsnet offer Don Cherry the opportunity to apologize on air and perhaps keep his job? I think that is the biggest factor, and I don't know the answer to that. Because if he did, and first of all, if he had the option to apologize, I'm not saying whether or not he would apologize. He's obviously very strongly opinionated. He might just put his foot down and be like, nope, I said what I said, that's what I meant. And I think if that's the case, his termination is justified, for sure. But if he didn't even have the option to go on air and apologize and make amends, I don't think that's a good look for Sportsnet. I don't think that's getting talked about enough because I think, in light of quote unquote cancel culture, I think there really needs to be room for people to redeem themselves and make amends, especially if what they did wasn't completely egregious. Because I think with Don Cherry, he said the wrong thing in the wrong moment. Maybe that's what he meant. Maybe that's not what he meant. But when you look at what some people get canceled or fired for, there's a lot worse things, though this is pretty bad. And, I'm not coming from the perspective of a person of color either. If I was, maybe I would feel totally different. But I really wonder if Sportsnet gave him the option to apologize. And I feel like they didn't. I feel like, at least that's what it looks like, just kind of on surface level, is that he said what he said and then they hopped right to firing him. And why that's a big deal is because Hockey Night in Canada with Don Cherry and Ron MacLean has been going since 1986. Okay? That's what? 6 years before I was born. Okay? Like, think about it. When you started watching hockey, I don't know, let's say you were 6 years old when you started watching hockey. If you were born between, 1980 and the 2010s, you grew up with Hockey Night in Canada. You grew up with Ron MacLean and Don Cherry, if you're a hockey fan, that is, of course. He's been doing this for well over 30 years. It's a big deal terminating his position at Sportsnet. It's a very big deal. Okay, he's been with this for a long time, and it's easy to look at the mistake he made, but he did a lot of good things as well, especially for supporting the troops. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough either. That I think there is a good person deep down in Don Cherry. I really do. He seems like a very genuine guy. Who made a mistake, and again, I really wonder if he was given the opportunity to apologize on air, just like Ron did. I really do. So let's go to Don Cherry's side of things. So he said something, I don't think he was expecting it to be a big deal in the moment, but it was, and again, he definitely needs to be sanctioned somehow for saying what he said. Whether or not you think terminating his role at Sportsnet is justified in that or not, that's a matter of debate for sure. I'm in the middle somewhere. And clearly this hit him pretty hard. You got to think he's well enough, he's well enough off that he could retire as well. But I don't think he wanted to, and you should retire on your own terms. Don Cherry never got a proper farewell, and I think considering what he's given to the hockey community, he deserves that. Really, he deserved that, and he, his role at Hockey Night Canada ended on such a bad note like that. And like I said, he went on to go do his own podcast. He did say in interviews that he wished he said everyone. He said that he was referring to everyone who wasn't wearing a poppy rather than just newcomers to Canada, which I think deep down that is what he meant, but who knows, right? I'm not inside his head. I can't say what exactly he was thinking in that moment, but it's tough, right? I think it's just a really disappointing way to end his time at Sportsnet. So let's talk about Sportsnet now, okay? So in episode 1, I went off a bit about my kind of dislike for Canadian markets. Not necessarily the teams or the players, just the media mostly. And I gotta say, Sportsnet sucks. Really, on the entertainment standpoint, it's not as good as the other broadcasts, okay? If I'm watching Edmonton versus LA, and my options are Sportsnet or Bally Sports, right? Bally Sports being the company that covers the LA Kings. I'm going with Bally Sports. I default to the American broadcast, with the exception of TSN. I like TSN. I think TSN does a good job. I think their broadcasts are great. I think they stuck to the same formula for a long time, and I like that consistency. And then ESPN is okay. And TNT is pretty good, I would say. They really focus on the entertainment side of things, which I really like. But yeah, Bally Sports, TSN, TNT, those are the ones I go to. But Sportsnet sucks. It's not. It's just not good anymore. You know, like I remember it's been a while now, but like even little things like the music they use in between commercial breaks, like they switched over to like this funky jazz at some point rather than like the iconic Hockey Night in Canada theme, and it feels super cringe. And lately they've been using country music. And first of all, I get that lots of people love country music. And I feel like the country music suits the show better than the funky jazz interludes or whatever. Um, and it still feels weird to me though, even with the country music. But I will say I think the country music's a step in the right direction. And that's coming from someone who's not a fan of country music. I think it suits the show better than like funky jazz or whatever. I don't think there's any like commentators on Sportsnet that really stand out. Ron McLean kind of feels a bit lost out there without Don Cherry. You know, I mean, it was peanut butter and jelly, right? Like, Ron McLean, he kind of just feels like that extra old guy that's there now, and he just looks a bit lost. At least the last few times I've watched Hockey Night in Canada, and I don't know. I don't think they have anyone that really moves the needle much anymore, right? I'm not big on Kevin Bieksa. He kind of feels like a Canadian stereotype a little bit, you know, like he's like he talks like he's from like Minnesota, kind of, you know. By the way, Minnesota, great place, great people, but they're more Canadian than Canadians sometimes, and that's kind of what it feels like. I'm not big on Kevin Bieksa, but you know, I'll watch interviews with him. He seems like he's pretty good, but on air, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan, to be honest. And Hockey Night in Canada, it's really not good without Don Cherry. And even like the last few years of having Don Cherry there, um, it did feel like it was going downhill. But I think the loss of Don Cherry, just looking at the Sportsnet team as a whole, I think losing him was a big part in terms of entertainment. Okay, again, I don't want to defend really what he said too much, because he made a mistake. That was not the right thing to say in that situation. It was definitely offensive, and it's unfortunate because whether or not that's what he meant or he didn't mean, um, you know, that's. Yeah, I recommend checking out interviews with Don Cherry to really get his side of things or how he now looks at things in hindsight, let's say. And then, in terms of just my opinion, just to wrap things up here, again, I'm in the middle. I totally understand both sides. But the biggest thing is, I wonder if Sportsnet gave him the opportunity to apologize. I think that's the biggest thing, okay? Because I think a guy who has been on Hockey Night in Canada that long, since the 1986, I think he deserved the right to apologize on air if he wanted to take that route. If he didn't, then I think his termination is justified. But I wonder if he had that opportunity to make things right and maybe change some people's opinions on the matter. You know, because I don't think he entirely came from a place of, you know, he didn't really want to single out a group like that. But who knows, right? Like, we're not inside his head. We don't know what exactly he was thinking in that moment. But again, I'm in the middle. Please let me know your thoughts on the matter now that we've had quite a bit of time to look back on things. Let me know what you think of Sportsnet right now, or even let me know what's your favorite broadcast right now, because again, I think Sportsnet, they might be the worst right now. I really do. I think if we have like a little tier list of all of the broadcasts, you know, I can't really tell you who's first right now for me. I like Bally Sports. I like, does NBC still do the Sharks games? I'm not sure, but I've always liked the Sharks broadcasts. I really like the Arizona ones, actually, with, was it Tyson Nash? Is that his name? Yeah, the Arizona broadcasts are great. And I think a lot of the American ones are pretty good. The Detroit one is fantastic always. Yeah. So, anyways, let me know what you think. I'm interested to know what you think about Sportsnet and the Don Cherry situation as a whole. And let's talk about some beer league hockey, okay? So, I'm not gonna get too much into. Well, I mean, of course, I'm gonna get quite a bit into my own team, right? That's my experience. That's the thing I'm going off of. But yeah, I run my own beer league team. I've been running this team for about 2 years now, and I like to think I'm doing a pretty good job. I've been told by my teammates that I've been doing a great job. Not to pump my own tires too much, but I think that being the person that primarily runs things for this team. In this past season, I've passed over a lot of the responsibility to other guys, and they've been doing a fantastic job as well. I think I really lucked out with the group of guys I have on my team because there's a lot of leadership on our team. Even the young guys, you can tell they're really going to grow into really good beer league leaders someday, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, it's really, really good group of guys. So, I don't know, I can get a bit into the origin story, I guess. So, right at the start of the pandemic there, me and a buddy of mine were talking about making a beer league team. And we didn't really know where to start. We would ask around on Facebook if there's any players or whatever. And somebody reached out saying, hey, I don't really want to run my team too much anymore, which is fair. It seemed like they were having some issues with some players, some locker room issues perhaps. And the player basically said, hey, if you bring me on board, I'll kind of bring over the really reliable guys from our team, good players who pay their fees. And, then you have a bit of a basis for a team. And I was a goalie at the time, too. And the plan was for me to play net for this team. But I was also kind of on the fence. Like, I think my days as a goalie were kind of coming to an end. I wasn't enjoying playing net as much. And I think I saw that as an opportunity for me to make the transition to playing as a skater, whether that be defense or forward. I didn't really care. I just wanted to try something new. So anyways, yeah, we brought in the goalie. We brought in about 10, 12 guys from his team, and that really made our core. And we picked up a few more guys here and there. And yeah, and then we had a team. And then the first season got kind of put on hold for COVID. We played like 4 games, and then the season was canceled. But then the following season, was it 2021? Yeah, 21-22, that season. We managed to play a full season, and that was just a really special season. We were in the second lowest division in the entire league, basically. It was called C2. So there's C1 and then C2. They kind of split it because of COVID reasons, just to kind of keep the bubble smaller, I guess. And then the lowest division being D. And with the rec hockey in that city, there's quite a bit of a divide in terms of skill. Like, think of it this way. You think maybe the lowest, like the worst team in our division would do okay in the even lower division, right? But no, they would probably destroy all those other teams. Like, there's a big difference. And same thing, if the best team in our current division moved up a division, they probably would get destroyed most nights. Like, there's a big divide. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so right now, no, not right now. Sorry, last season, they were C1, C2, and we had a phenomenal season. We ended up going 32-7-1 out of 40 games. And we didn't like dominate every single game at all. There were some really close games that we won. We just found a way to win, and these were some of the players on my team, myself included, were really used to losing. I'd never been on a good team before that year. Never. At best, I was on like 500 teams, right? And that was the first time as a group we really, experienced winning, right? We started the season 4-4, and then we went on a 10-game win streak. And then we had an overtime loss, but we had a spare goalie in that, and he was kind of shaky. I feel like we should have won that game. And then we had an 8-game win streak, and then we lost one in regulation, and then we won another 5. So we had a stretch of the season where we went 23-1-1, which is crazy. That stretch, we really learned how to win. And then there's a few more wins, a few more losses sprinkled in there, and yeah, we ended up with 32 wins out of 40 games. So we won the regular season, obviously. And then in the playoffs, we went 5-0 and we won the championship. And that was just like insane. And again, those weren't blowouts. Like every single game in the playoffs, we were behind at one point. Like we came back in every single game and just found a way to win. One of those games we actually won by forfeit because the other team didn't have enough players, so they were forced to forfeit. But I mean, that kind of stresses the importance of being able to run a team properly, which I'll get into in a second. And then in the finals of that playoffs, that was the closest game. We won 5-4, but that could have easily gone the other way. That was the closest game I've ever been in. Very memorable. If we lost that game, it would have been heartbreaking. And we ended up winning, and it was just like, even for beer league hockey, having that kind of success is really special. It was a really awesome moment. And then this season, they combined the division that was ahead of us and our current division, and that's been going okay. As you'd expect, we've been about a middle of the pack so far. We're 12-8 at the time of recording this, so I think we're in 5th place out of 11 teams. So yeah, middle of the pack. We're trying to finish top 5 so that we qualify for like the better playoffs. So I think the best 5 teams are going to play in like the true playoffs, and then the bottom 6 teams are going to play for basically the 6th place playoff or whatever you want to call it. And we don't want to be in that. We want to really make a run for the whole thing. I don't think we're going to win the regular season at this point, but I think we're more focused on the playoffs because let's be honest, at any level in any sport, it's the playoffs that matter most, right? Like a playoff championship is a way better feeling than a regular season championship. I think that's pretty universal. And then in the off season, we had to go through a bit of a rebrand again, because our sponsor was being very, very flaky. So we went out and found a new sponsor, and they've been great. We also changed our jerseys because we didn't want to represent our other sponsors. And I'll get into how that played a role as well. So we got those sweet LA Kings reverse retros colors now. I love them. The guys voted on it, and I think we made the right choice. They look sick, especially with the last name on the back. They look so sick. I love it. You can see it on the screen there on YouTube. I sound so old on the YouTube. And they turned out so sick. So why do I think I'm doing a good job running this team? So the biggest thing is communication. Okay, like we've got multiple forms of communication, I guess, but you want to keep things in one central place as much as you can. So we've got a Facebook group, which I just use that more as an archive so I can point things back to people, because most of the people focus on the Facebook group chat for stuff. And obviously things get lost in the group chat. You start talking smack with other people, obviously all in good fun, but things will get lost in that. So it's nice having the Facebook group as an archive. And we only have one player on our team that doesn't have Facebook. So, with him, I just text him directly. It's not a big deal at all. Most of the guys have Facebook, so it makes it pretty easy to communicate things overall. And then, of course, we have TeamSnap, which I know most leagues use these days. It's a good communication tool. I could probably go over to TeamSnap full-time if I wanted, but I don't really want to. Sorry, I did that all in like one breath, but communication's been huge. I would say that's the biggest part of it. It's keeping everyone in the loop. Don't worry about being too annoying either, because in my opinion, it's better to say something a few times rather than not saying it at all. So I think that's helped a ton. I always try to give opportunities for the players to give their own voice on things. Like with the jerseys, we voted on that most recent set of jerseys, and we've had multiple votes on things too. And I always try to get guys' opinions on things as much as I can. It doesn't hurt to message someone directly if you need to talk about something in particular. So, don't be afraid of people, I guess is what I'm getting at. Being organized is huge. I'm no spreadsheet expert by any means, but I've gotten better with Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets as well. uh, with over the last couple of years, because especially when you're keeping track of fees, because we pay fees to play too. That's pretty important. So you have to be pretty good at managing money, but having a spreadsheet with everyone's info, how much they've paid, how much your team has paid as a whole, just having everything in one place helps a ton. It really, really does. I think that's something that's made my job a lot easier as our team rep. And you definitely want to have guys on your team that are on top of things. That's something I really, really appreciate about my team, is that they are on it. Sometimes you'll run into someone who forgets about a deadline, and if you just message them directly, they get on it right away. People are human, they make mistakes. Again, don't be afraid to directly message someone and be like, hey, there was a deadline yesterday, and then they're on it, because, we got good guys on our team. So there you go. And that's another thing too. When you bring in guys on your team, I don't say do like a background check, but it's nice having guys who can vouch for other guys. Like a lot of the players on my team, they were brought in because of like another guy on our team, maybe coworkers, maybe even like a sibling or something like that, or even just a friend. Our guys always vouch for, or they've all vouched for each other pretty much, and that helps a ton, right? You also got to look at what positions need to be filled too. For example, right before the season started, I kind of had a choice between a forward and a defenseman. Defensemen are a little bit tough to come by sometimes, so I went with the defenseman because we only really have room for one more player. So you need to factor in who plays what position. The guys on our team who are willing to play forward or D, I appreciate that so much, because having flexibility when you're making your lineup every night, it's really, really nice having a bit of wiggle room. So yeah, and some people, they'll want to play strictly forward because they doubt their ability to play defense, which is totally fair, right? I get that. We want to go out and win every game. It's nice that we have guys that are honest about that. We got a really, really good team, and it's important to really stay organized with that as well. Keeping track of who likes to play with who is a big deal as well, because you want guys having fun, right? And who knows chemistry better than those guys? That doesn't mean like don't be afraid to experiment with lines or D pairings, but you also want to keep your guys happy as well. And a lot of those guys who are friends with each other, usually they have pretty good chemistry as well. So we try to keep things the same every night as much as we can. But overall, really good group of guys. I really love working with this team. All right, needed to have a quick sip of my coffee there. Another thing I want to talk about is leadership as well. So distributing the leadership on your team. So I'm kind of glad I'm not the team captain. Like, I'm not the guy who's taking on every single responsibility, because I think it's important to distribute your leadership. I think, and you can even see this at the NHL level too. I think the teams that have success, it's not just the teams that have one guy who is the leader of the team. I think when you have multiple guys taking on some sort of role, I think that really generates a bit more success on the team level. So we have a lot of letters on our team. We got our team captain who's doing a phenomenal job, and he's been with that group for a while too. So they all know him, they all trust him, and I think we made the right decision naming him captain. But we also have 4 A's, myself included, and a part of that has to do with like attendance each game. For example, I've only played like 10 out of 20 games because I live in a different community now, so I have to travel. Makes it tough during the winter months. So I can't make a lot of games. And I mean, there's been times where we got 5 guys who are wearing a letter, but sometimes we've only had like one of those guys be able to make it. And you need to have a captain there to represent your team. So I think it's good that we have a lot of people who have taken on that leadership role. And even a lot of the guys who don't have a letter are phenomenal leaders, and I can really trust them in a lot of those situations where we need a guy on the bench really keeping things cool. Because I know I am a leader on our team, but sometimes I can't keep my cool because I'm a human. So yeah, we have tons of leadership on our team, and I think distributing that leadership is important. And another thing about not taking on all of the responsibility is don't be afraid to ask some of your teammates if they're willing to take on a bit, just to make your life a bit easier too. I mean, we got one guy who handles the lock and the pucks. We got a guy who's been really handling a lot of the roster stuff while I've been away and unable to make it. We have a ton of leadership, and don't be afraid to reach out to guys and see if they're willing to take on a bit more, because odds are you definitely have guys on your team who want to step up and take on a bit more responsibility. So there you go. Just make your life a bit easier in that regard. Um, and I think that's it. Really, I don't have too much more to go off of on that. Really hoping we can have another winning season here, maybe get another championship going, but we'll see. We're in a much tougher division this year, so who knows how things will go. And that's pretty much it for this episode of the podcast. It went a little bit longer than expected, but that's okay. Hopefully I didn't repeat myself too much on some of those matters. And yeah, please let me know what you think about the Don Cherry situation, how you might feel about Sportsnet these days. Anything you want to mention about Beer League, feel free to leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube page as well. I would definitely appreciate that support. We're hoping to get to 10 subscribers before the end of 2023. That's pretty sweet. And yeah, I'm hoping to get another episode going here before the end of the day. We'll see. I'm playing a bit of drop-in hockey later today, so we'll see if I have time for that. And thank you so much for the support. I got a lot of support on episode 1. I definitely appreciate people taking the time to listen to this. And yeah, take care.